وامنح الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك كن سموحا لخصمك ألقى خصمك أحبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك واحتفل بالمودة إنما
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of the Sulaimaan Ravat Show. We are coming to you live this beautiful Friday evening from our studios here in Sunning Hill, Johannesburg. Last week, as I was driving to the studio from Lenasia, where I reside, there was thunder. It was threatening to rain, but the rain never really came down. I think I mentioned last week as we started the program that there was a few drops and then it kind of just disappeared. As we speak right now, it is in this part anyway, I'm not sure about other parts of the province or the country, it is raining steadily. But yeah, there is a water crisis in South Africa. And that is the theme for the discussion this evening for the program. We're talking about the challenge and as far as water is concerned. We hear about it almost every day on the news now. People are talking about rain. People are praying and they are supplicating for rain. There's a lot of misunderstanding as well in terms of the level and the extent and why we have the challenges that we have with water. So we're going to be focusing the entire program this evening on this topic. Our first guest in studio this evening is the spokesperson for the Department of Water and Sanitation, and that is Mr. Sputnik Ratau. Sputnik, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to the program. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us again, and thanks for your time, Moulana.
Would you call it a crisis?
Would I call it a crisis? I wouldn't say so. Is it a concern? Yes. Is it a serious concern? Yes. Based on a few things. One is the fact that South Africa is an arid country. We receive, even at the best of times, less than world average rainfall. So that in itself tells you that we cannot compare ourselves to some of the countries that have got lots and lots of water all the time. If you look at the Nordic countries, maybe if you look at countries like your DRC and so on, we really are different because we are in an area that is dictated to by different kinds of impacts, and therefore we are in that kind of situation.
What kind of criteria do you use? What kind of measurement is there to determine, how bad the situation is?
Well, in the case of South Africa, remember that we basically depend primarily on surface water for our water. Therefore, it implies that we depend on how much rainfall we receive, because that then goes into our rivers, and then it first it recharges our rivers, our ecosystems. It also recharges our groundwater, our wetlands, and so on, before it even goes into any area where we could have dams and reservoirs and so on. So it is very critical for us to have at least getting into the winter season, where the larger part of the country is a summer season rainfall area. If we get into the summer season, that is into the winter season, that is at the cutoff of the summer rainfall season, which is the end of April, and our average national dam levels are at about anything above 80%, then we are in a kind of a comfortable place. Considering the fact that for about 4 months at least, we will not see rainfall. But remember as well that due to the impact of climate change, weather patterns have changed. We have inclement weather patterns that will not come according to what we used to predict. And therefore, we would hope that at the beginning of the rainy season, which we hope would be early September, mid-September, we would then have the first rainfalls. We haven't seen that up to now. And therefore, that is why we are saying we are concerned, because we are having very high temperatures, and we are not having the early rainfall that we would have that would have assisted us in terms of our recharge.
Now, if we do a quick analysis of the various provinces and the various parts of the country, if we start with Gauteng, what are the dam levels looking like? How's the situation? What's your analysis of Gauteng currently?
Well, Gauteng, remember, is served by a combination of 14 dams, which comprise what we call the integrated Vaal River system, with catchments in Mpumalanga, the Free State, Northwest, as well as Mpumalanga, Northwest, Free State, and Northern Cape. Those catchments give us about 73% of the water that we always have in the integrated Vaal River system, with the Lesotho Highlands Water Project providing the rest of the 27%. At the moment, we are, in terms of the integrated Vaal River system, just above the 60% level, which is about 12% less than where we were a year ago. A year ago at this time, we were at about 72.4 or something like that. So that obviously implies that we have less water in our system than we had a year ago. But we are having higher temperatures than we experienced last year. And therefore, that implies that we are seeing more evaporation, and we're not too sure how far that will take us. We are concerned. We are also wanting to remind South Africans that whatever it is that you might do to prepare will not be able to be as effective as when it is combined with just good behavior towards water.
What about the Cape? We know a few years ago there was a big problem there.
2017 was a very big problem for the Western Cape. Remember that the Western Cape came very late into the impact of the drought that started in 2014. And therefore, in 2017, that is when we actually saw the larger impact of the drought in the Western Cape. They have had good rains this winter season. They are a winter rainfall season area. And therefore, at this moment, the Western Cape, the dam levels are at about 64.3%, which is slightly down from where they were a year ago. A year ago, they were at about 65.9. So they are not doing too badly. But you must remember that now they are going into their dry season. And what we are seeing as well is that I think they've been a bit more comfortable than they were a year ago because their consumption patterns have just risen.
Yeah.
So that's not a very good sign.
So where are the critical areas at the moment? We're hearing about Barberton in Mpumalanga. There are some stories making the news about KZN.
Our critical areas are the most critical one is Eastern Cape. Eastern Cape is the one. Northern Cape, we've got about 5 districts there that are also seeing, and it's largely the farming area that have got issues. Then we've got Limpopo and we've got Northwest. Those are the ones that are critical. But we also have concerns in the Free State, especially around Maluti Apofung, where Fikapatso Dam, which actually services the local municipality there, is almost empty. And then, yeah, those are the ones that we are really looking at and we are quite worried about.
We know in Gauteng a few years ago there was a bit of a tight situation, and then when we went into the early part of the following year, I'm just struggling to remember which year it was, we had quite a bit of rainfall and then the dams filled up quite a bit. If we do a comparison, are we still much better off than a few years ago?
We are not better off now than then. And I think I remember the time, that was 2016.
Yes, yes.
That is when we actually got to a point where we had to go into our reserve dam, which is Sterkfontein, which is high up in the mountains in the Free State, beyond Harrismith that way. Where we had to go and draw from that reserve dam, because Sterkfontein Dam is basically our reserve dam for the integrated Vaal River system if it gets too tight. And at that time, I think the system was at about 25% going towards 20. But the interesting thing is that we had planned that we would draw water from Sterkfontein from about the middle of November to around the middle of December, around the 23rd. Because we were not expecting rainfall. But then we had those very, very serious rains that you are talking about into January.
Yes.
And that was unexpected because had we known, I think we would have had a shorter period to draw water from Sterkfontein. So it was that combination that was very helpful because then we were able to recharge Sterkfontein again, but also the system itself, the integrated Vaal River system, then was in a much more healthy space going into 2017 for Gauteng.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, there are concerns across the country. Some places a bit more, others not that much. But it's nowhere near crisis point. That's what you're saying.
In terms of Gauteng, because a lot of
Yeah.
people concentrate on Gauteng, especially because the Val Dam is below 50%. And
Yes.
everybody thinks when the Val Dam is there, then the system has collapsed. In terms of Gauteng, we are not anywhere near there. In terms of the Eastern Cape, for instance, we are very, very concerned. There are areas that are struggling, your Grafreinet and some of those, where the systems are almost, or rather the rivers are almost empty. Some of them, they are below 10%, others, and so on and so forth. So there you do have concerns. But also you have other things that come in that really impact on water availability. The status of infrastructure, for instance, where even if you were to have water, but if you are not able to reticulate that water, then you have issues. So it is a combination of things. That is why Minister, about a week ago or so, she decided that, you know what, we've got to assist some of those municipalities, probably send in some of our technical people who are very astute, who understand these things, to be able to assist those municipalities, but also look at other things. Look at how they even manage their finances, because there is infrastructure funding that goes to those municipalities. But the question is, does it go to actually infrastructure maintenance? Because the idea is that let us look after the infrastructure that is in place now, even before you start thinking of developing new infrastructure, because infrastructure development by its nature is a long-term issue.
Right, it's time for our first break. When we come back, we continue the discussion on the water situation in South Africa with the spokesperson for the department.
جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حبا جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حبا.
Welcome back. So we're talking about the water situation in the country, and we have Mr. Sputnik Ratau from the Department of Water and Sanitation in studios with us this evening. The situation in Barberton, according to the news, that seems to be very serious. What's the problem there?
The situation in Barberton is also serious. It's a combination of two things. One, it is the fact that we also have infrastructure failure there. But secondly, there is some pollution, but there was misinformation as well.
Okay.
Because incidentally, I was talking to my colleague from Mpumalanga office just this afternoon about it. There were reports that people have been taken to hospital with issues of diarrhea and what have you and all that. We checked with the hospital and we didn't have anything like that happening. So the issue of pollution is a problem, but I think one of the things that we need to do and to be very careful about, especially in how we communicate some of these things, whether it be from a community point of view or even ourselves as officials, is how we communicate that thing. Are we concerned about the quality of water at source? Yes, we are. Do we want to advise people what to do if they are going to draw water directly from source? That's yes, that becomes important to do. But I think this issue of creating panic is what we are trying to avoid, so that even in the communication that we do from any sphere of our society, it should be measured, it should be verified, and it should be correct. So it is that. But yes, Barberton is one of the areas in Mpumalanga that has got issues around the issue of pollution.
You spoke earlier on about climate change, and this is a worldwide, it's a global phenomenon. How does it specifically impact on South Africa? And global change has been spoken about for quite some time now, for a number of years. Are there any unique characteristics of climate change in recent years?
There is. One of the difficulties that has come up with climate change for us is that our weather has become very difficult to predict. And that is why even the weather services are not able to tell us particularly directly when we will have the first rains that are consistent. When I was talking to one of our specialist scientists in the department who deal with issues of climate change, they will tell you that part of what we see as a result of climate change is the desertification of the country from the West especially, the way our country is becoming more and more of a desert. Unfortunately, the Northern Cape is mainly impacted upon, but when you look at the amount of rainfall, the amount of snow cover that we should have experienced in the Eastern Cape, that would have assisted us. You can see that there's a marked reduction in that amount of snow that was there. It's almost non-existent. But when you look at the region as a whole, for instance, because you must remember that as part of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, most of the water that comes into those tunnels is water that comes from the mountains, where there was, in the winter, normally there should have been thick snow cover. But we've seen less and less of that. That is why when you look at the water levels in Lesotho at the moment, they are quite low. And therefore, it is something that you can be able to see directly as to what is happening. When you look at, the temperatures in the oceans, they are no longer the same as before, and that is why you find even the behavior of your fish and all of that thing has kind of changed. Some of the fish stock that you would necessarily find anytime from September up to now, you may not find. That is why now there is that difficulty with the penguins, because there's not enough sardines, where they actually breed and reside in order to be able to keep up that colony of penguins going.
So, what's the department's plan around climate change? How do you analyze it? How do you prepare for it? How do you preempt? What do you do?
Well, climate change has got, we respond to climate change within the response of the country. And if you remember that the climate change response is basically in the hands of the Department of Environmental Affairs and Forestry. But we have an interest because it's got an impact on the resource that we have to deal with. So as part of our planning, our planners have got to talk to our scientists to say, in terms of what is happening in the weather patterns, what do we see? Because you must remember that in order to plan infrastructure development, whatever it may be, whether it's a pipeline or it's a dam, it's a long-term thing. So you find that the planners have initially looked at what is on the ground, because the flow of the river is as such and such, but over time, those changes happen. So therefore, it informs the kind of decisions that are made by the department closer to the time when the finalization of those infrastructure developments is concerned. But also it forms part of what we put into our awareness campaigns, because if we do not do that, then our campaigns will fall short. Because as part of the adaptation, we have to see how we advise communities as to what are the things that impact on climate change and how can we move away from that. For instance, the issue of new types of fuel to fuel our livelihoods. Do we still depend basically on fossil fuel? Our country, unfortunately, is endowed with coal. We have used it over the years, but there are new ways of burning coal. So those kind of interactions that we have with our communities in order to learn new ways. We have what we call the Water Research Commission that assists us in terms of some of the latest technologies that come in. Obviously, the change of behavior is a long-term issue and it takes time. And therefore, in order for us to be able to bring that kind of adaptation into play, is going to take us a bit of time. But as a developing country as well, we do depend on first world technologies. We do depend on funding that comes from the UN funds for climate change. So those kind of things, and you find that South Africa is in a very queer situation where we are a developing country, but we are not regarded as so backwards that we actually need the kind of funding that is given to other countries that are in the same category.
When it comes to infrastructure, there's been a lot of criticism of the department in terms of maintenance of infrastructure, and there's allegations that are consistently leveled against you guys that a lot of the water challenges that we have in the country is as a result of the failure of the department to do adequate maintenance on infrastructure. To what extent is that allegation correct?
I would easily say that it is actually incorrect, because our infrastructure maintenance program is quite robust. And when you look at it, we deal with major infrastructure, our dams, our canals, we deal with our pipelines, major pipelines. And we have a program that looks after that part of our business, and it's operating quite, I could easily say, quite well. I think the difficulty that we have within the value chain of water supply, as well as everything that is related, is that our infrastructure must be married to the infrastructure at municipal level. Mm-hmm. And that is where a lot of issues come in terms of capacity to be able to maintain and look after that infrastructure at local level. Capacity to be able to attract and retain technical capacity that is able to identify and make sure that infrastructure is kept up to speed. Particularly because most of the municipalities, are not able to collect sufficient revenue. Some of them are not as well off as you would want them to be. The difference is that when you look at them in comparison to the metros and some of the bigger district municipalities, that is where you find the disjuncture. So there is a lot of work that we do with municipalities. We have what we call the Regional Bulk Infrastructure Grant that we administer, that assists municipalities to be able to look after those. But we cannot just throw money at it. There has to be a business plan that we can sign off on and be able to follow through, because part of what we actually got into, as you correctly allude to, when we had issues with the Auditor General, for instance, is that we were not able to follow the money right through to the very end, and that is where we actually had issues.
All right, time for the next break. We're having a discussion on the water situation in the country with the Department of Water and Sanitation's spokesperson, Sputnik Rata. Water, 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 rain, rain, rain. We're talking about the water situation in the country this evening with Sputnik Rata. He is the spokesperson for the Department of Water and Sanitation. How much of a challenge is urbanization when it comes to managing water resource?
It's actually one of the major challenges that we have to deal with. When you think about the fact that if you look at, let's make the example of Gauteng again. And maybe Western Cape to a certain extent, and so on. Even some of maybe KZN, and so on. Where we have Gauteng as the smallest province, and yet we have the biggest population. Although Gauteng does have some rural areas, but it is mainly urban. So the movement of people into the urban areas is a big challenge, because now we're dealing with much more higher numbers than what the infrastructure was budgeted to look after. So it is a very big issue, because it is not just about the bulk infrastructure that we deal with, but even at local level. Then you have the reservoirs, the municipal reservoirs that are not able to provide the amount of water that might be necessary for the numbers that are there. The number of children in schools, the number of people who go to clinics and hospitals, and so on and so forth. So urbanization is a very big challenge for us. Another big challenge that we might want to look at as an example is the rapid industrialization that we are looking at. And obviously all of those things have got an impact, because they attract people to certain areas. But we also have other things that are unintended and really unwelcome that also come into play. Vandalism of infrastructure, illegal connections where people might think that, look, this pipeline is going past my place, and mainly it might also be within an informal area where there was no plan to have people living there. And therefore, those illegal connections, besides reducing the pressure for the water that is being pumped into that pipeline, also bring in the issues of leaks that are all over the place that are uncontrolled, because the people that are doing the connections are not actually people that are capacitated to do so.
What is the predictions now in terms of rainfall? You mentioned earlier on that we ought to have been having rain already from early September. We're getting a bit of rain now, but it's early November.
Yes, the prediction is that between middle of November and middle of December, we might only receive below average rainfall. So which is not going to do much to our recharge that we require. And between the middle of December and the end of February, that is where we're going to see above average rainfall. But the difficulty with that above average rainfall is that it comes in with localized flooding as well. Now, localized flooding has also got its own negative implications, because it might destroy infrastructure, and that water might just run off to places where you don't want it to be, because it is not within a catchment that is working for you. And so those are the kind of things that we are looking at. But we would hope that married to that above average rainfall and up to the end of the rainy season, which is the end of April, we might see more consistent rainfall, which is what we actually need.
So in line with that then, by the time we come to the end of April, we could be pretty much out of that area of concern as well.
We could be, or we could even be earlier. But obviously the area of concern is that as South Africans, we have to accept the fact that we are living in an arid country. We must get it into our DNA that water conservation and water demand management must be primary wherever we are, not just domestic, industry, agriculture, and everybody else.
Now, this delayed rainfall, what impact is it having on agriculture? Because it could rain at a later stage, but it might not necessarily help that cycle, right? That
is a big worry for us, because it implies that farmers either decide to plant late, which will have the impact on the quality of their crops when they come through, or they might choose not to plant at all. So if they don't plant, it means there's going to be a loss of jobs, there's going to be a loss of income for them, and the end. So it's a very big worry, because also you must remember that would have an impact on our export markets, because some of them are actually exporting their product. And so it's a combination of factors that we would not want to see, actually.
Ever so often in the media, we hear talk about the Department of Water being in a bit of a shambles, and that the last minister left it in a bad state and the new minister inherited a very crippled department. What's your response to that?
Well, I think we did go through a dip. We have to accept that we did go through a very difficult time. What we then had to do was to take maybe a step backwards and say, what is it that needs to happen? So part of what we are doing now is that we've put together a recovery plan that includes very stringent adherence to the prescripts of the PMFA. We are working very closely with National Treasury to make sure that whatever tranches that we receive are actually already, timed out as to exactly what is going to be happening, and so on and so forth. It is difficult to get out of that, because all of a sudden you realize that the belt has really got to be tight. But also we are looking at some of the outcomes of the Auditor General's reports over the years, and to start ticking them off to say, how far have we gone, this one and that one and so on. The reality is that we had to start looking at also some of the very grants that we use that are basically grants that come through the department but are meant for municipalities. And the question is, do we really want to take responsibility for those grants? Because in terms of what they ultimately do, it's not something that the department is responsible for. But in terms of the Division of Revenue Act, they must come through the Department of Water and Sanitation and then be directed to the respective municipalities.
Now, the minister mentioned a few days ago that there's going to be this grand plan that's going to be unveiled sometime in November. What can you tell us about that?
That is what we are looking at. That is a plan that must be in tandem with the National Development Plan, because if you remember, in the National Development Plan, there is a mention of what the impact of water and water availability will be on the growth of the country. And therefore, in order to address some of those issues, we had to look at what is it that we are able to do and what is it that we need to do. So that plan will basically be able to outline exactly what the issues are that we are not doing right now, and what would happen if we continue along that path. What are the things that we need to do, and what is the impact if we do not do those things, so that we can then, go on and say, the question is, what is it that we actually must do in order to be able to get the country going?
Finally then, Sputnik, some practical tips for our viewers out there, water conservation.
Very, quite a number of them when you look at, the total value chain of water and sanitation. But maybe to look at domestically, what do we do? One of the first things that you always do is look at how you use your tap water. Do you let your water run when you're brushing your teeth? You may not think that it's that much water that is being lost there. But the ripple effect, if you look at the number of households within a community, and if everybody does that and just brushes the teeth with the water running, whereas you can just put water in a cup, brush your teeth, rinse it off, and that's it. How much water do we actually reuse and recycle? Grey water. Very little, if any. All of us, once we have done anything, whether it be a washing machine or a bath water or whatever, we just throw out. Whereas we can be able to recycle that, maybe use it to flush in the toilet, maybe use it to clean outside of the household. Because the idea is that we need to move away from using potable water to for instance, clean our pavings, with a hose pipe and you see water running off. Do we need potable water to clean a car? And things like that. But in terms of industry as well, how much are they recycling that water that they use? If the mining industry can be able to recycle the acid mine drainage that comes out of there, because that's also a question that we are looking at, to say, do we want to recycle that acid mine drainage maybe up to industrial use, so that we can reduce the demand for potable water in industry? And maybe we can come to a time where even we can even recycle that water to potable level, but we are not there yet. In terms of your irrigation technologies, are there new technologies that are looking at new ways of driving irrigation? What time do you irrigate? During the course of the day when the sun is so hot that you are just going to evaporate that water? Even your own watering around the house, the best time to water is before sunrise or just before sunset and after sunset, so that you can have as little of evaporation happening as you can.
Mr. Sputnik Ravat, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us on your show.
All right, we take our third and final break. When we come back, we'll be doing a Skype link up to Moulana Sulaimaan Patel out in Middelburg, talking about water conservation from an Islamic perspective. All right, so we spent quite a bit of time talking to Sputnik Ravat. He is the spokesperson for the Department of Water and Sanitation about the water situation in the country. He said, look, we are in a period of concern, but it's nowhere near crisis for most parts. Eastern Cape, Graaff-Reinet, a bit of Northern Cape, yes. Barberton has got issues in terms of contamination and infrastructure issues and that kind of thing. But there shouldn't be any panic. Anyway, let's look at an Islamic perspective from Moulana Sulaimaan Patel of Middleburg on conservation of water from an Islamic perspective. Moulana, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Moulana, remind us, with regards the pivotal role of water in Islam.
So water is an amana, a trust, and it is a right of all mankind. Water occupies a pivotal role in Islam, and it is recognized by Muslims as a blessing that gives and sustains life and purifies humankind and the earth. The Arabic word for water, that is ma, is referenced exactly 63 times throughout the Holy Quran, and it is a recurring topic in many of the sayings of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran Kareem has set down the foundations of water conservation and demand management by making it known to humankind that Earth's water resources are finite in the verse 23 of Surah Al-Mu'mineen, where Allah Ta'ala says, "And we send down from the sky, that is water, rain in due measure, and we gave it lodging in the earth, and verily we are able to take it away." So from here we can understand how important it is that we save and conserve water, and we do not waste water, because this is a great ni'mah, a great blessing from Allah Ta'ala.
When it comes specifically to utilizing water responsibly, water conservation, what guidelines does Islam give?
There's so many guidelines that Islam gives us, and we look at in the time of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he would make wudu, as well as how he used to bath. And this hadith is mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim, where it is mentioned Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam for wudu, he used water equivalent to a mud. A mud is a measurement that was used, which is less than a liter, that is plus minus 750 milliliters. So what so little water Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam made wudu with. And whenever Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to take a bath, he took a bath with a measurement which is called a sa' of water, which is approximately 3 liters. So from here we can understand and see how little water Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam used for wudu, as well as to take a bath, and in that way he saved a lot of water. And we should also try our level best to follow in that prophetic way of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Apart from the wudu and the ghusl, what other tips, what other guidelines would you share with our viewers this evening, Moulana?
There's a few that we can share with you, definitely. One is that when we're using water, when opening the tap, we need to use it wisely. Water should be used sparingly, especially when washing hands, when we are making wudu, taking a bath, like we had mentioned. We should be conscious each time we open the tap and open it according to the need. So the tap that we have these days is already on that hot and cold in the middle, so there's no need to check whether it's hot or cold. We just know exactly where to put it, and the water will be as we require it to be. Then when we are taking showers, we make sure that we don't have too long showers. We shorten the time of our showering, and in this way we will save up to 45 liters of water. And also we should try to install low flow shower heads, as this can save many liters of water per minute. Ideally, we try to use a water for wudu and a bucket for bathing. The third one is, if we are using those kind of taps where it doesn't have that hot and cold, then we turn off the tap when soaping one's hands. And even if we have the hot and cold water as a way of when making wudu, then we also close the tap so that the water does not run. That is also when we are brushing our teeth, soaping our body, or washing our hair in the shower as well. And also when we're going out, we need to save water. Even it is mentioned that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed by Sa'd radiallahu anhu, who was making wudu, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Why this extravagance, O Sa'd?" Sa'd radiallahu anhu asked, is there extravagance in wudu also? Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam replied, yes, even if you are making wudu at the bank of a flowing river. So even if there's so much of water, abundance of water, even at that moment we need to make sure that we use the water very sparingly. And also these days, we want to put water in our gardens and our grass and our lawns, etc. So there's also a way to save the water. How do we save water outdoors? By making sure that when watering the garden, instead of a hose pipe, we use a watering can. So in that way, we're saving and minimizing the usage of water. The water, when we're watering the garden early morning or the evening, then only do it when it's necessary, because a hose pipe uses 1,000 liters of water an hour. And the last part, that if we see there's some water dripping, we need to make sure that we need to ourselves or get the plumber in repairing faulty taps and fix the drips, because these leaks and drips will continue. One is we are wasting water, and the other one is our water bill is going to be so high, and then we're going to complain, why is the water bill high? And then when the plumbers come and do the checks and they find out that there's a leak. So in this way, we sort out and repair the taps, we will save up to 15 liters of water a day, inshallah.
Inshallah. Moulana, Jazakumullah for your time. We really appreciate it.
Jazakallah khairan for the opportunity.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That was Moulana Sulaimaan Patel of Middleburg. The theme for this evening's discussion was water. I'm not sure if it's still raining outside. Before the program started, it was. Let's continue to make dua to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala for beneficial rain. Until next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك كن سموحا لخصمك تلقى خصمك أحبك